Camera uitzetten.
All right. All right, welcome. Slowly some people dripping in. Let me see, I can share my screen. All right, you can now see my screen, right? I assume. It's always a bit of puzzling in the beginning of these kind of things. Perfect. All right. Yes, very good. Very nice. All right, we're slowly taking the time, allowing some people to come in. I cannot see all of this. There we go. All right, I see some people that I know in the audience. Adam Molnar, welcome, promoting you to panelist. Same thing goes for Adam Seffler.
What about me?
There we go. Welcome, Philip.
Hey, guys.
And let me see. All right, very good. Adam, I'm making you co-host. There we go. Just so you know, same thing goes for Adam Seffler. And I think we're then pretty much live to get started. All right, I can now also see the chat. Technical setup is almost ready. Welcome, Adam. Good to see you. Thank you for making it on such short notice. Let me see. There we go. Radhika also. All right. The first two people to speak, apart from me, are both called Adam, so this will create some confusion, but that's totally fine. All right, I'll kick it off slowly. So, thank you all for being here. Welcome to the third edition of the Neurotech Amsterdam meetup. And yeah, we started about last year, had 3 sessions. First one is on the introduction to brain-computer interfaces, partly for the people that don't have any background in this field, neurotech and brain-computer interface, and partly for the people that are health veterans or just want to know more about the ecosystem in general. And, oh, let me see, more technical questions. Let me see, there we go. Okay, boom. That should work now. And so the first one is on introduction to brain-computer interface. The second one was more was part of a bigger initiative in terms of the Neurotech Buzz in Review, and that was worldwide in multiple chapters around the world. We also organized one session and had the CEO of Think Hum over. And today we're here for the first kind of like specific theme in terms of we just want to see what the opportunity of neurotechnology and brain-computer interface could be in the realm of gaming, right? So what could it mean for the gaming community, for the gaming industry? And we have 2 very, very interesting thinkers, both of whom I've seen some talk beforehand, but I'll try to look with a beginner's mind. I know they're both good speakers, so that will be fun to hear. And they have a lot of experience in this area, in this industry, essentially. So before we get started, let me show you a few slides. There we go. So first off, thank you for the team, the NeuroTechAMS team. Maarten, Wessel, Philip, all 3 of you are awesome. And this event is only here because you're here. So thank you very much. You will also see them in the chat. Then, very quick introduction on the NeuroTechX community, essentially. So it's the biggest community of neurotech enthusiasts worldwide, right? So there's a lot of people working on different realms of this. Can be scientists, they can be business people, they can be technologists. But in the end, especially with a realm as complex as this, in terms of well, you need a lot of different perspectives and different people to meet with each other. And I think that's amazing about NeuroTechX, that it just connects all these different people. Same thing for me, did some research, learned a lot about it, then found this community, and that's the gate to the neurotech realm, if that makes sense, because suddenly you get to meet new people. So it's very good. And to give you an idea here, some numbers, I think they're even outdated by now. There's probably more people there. Biggest thing to know is that there's a Slack channel, and people are very active in there. So if you have questions about this field, or you want to know how to well, add some value there, or just get involved in any way possible, go to the neurotechx.com website, and there you can find a link to the Slack. There are 3 key pillars of NeuroTechX in terms of the community. That's what I just explained. You get to meet all the people. The education side of things, so those are these kinds of meetups, making sure that more people get to know the basics and get to know the fundamentals, and that they all get to learn from each other. And the innovation side of things, that's also a natural extension of making people meet and teaching them more, right? So it's all kind of like a logical system. Thank you, Brian, for sharing the website. And today we have 2 very interesting speakers. So how we went about this, we looked at, okay, how can neurotechnology or brain-computer interface? So how can we connect our brain and our computer to actually get a better gaming experience? And Adam is the co-founder of Nurable and the head of partnerships at the moment, and he's been there from the beginning. So very, very interesting to see what this is all about. And for Adam, it was a bit fun experience to plan this, because I asked him like, hey, do you want to speak here? And then it was a definite yes. And then later on it was like, but wait, a talk in 2 weeks? No, that's going to be impossible, right? So then we tried to think some creatively, and now essentially what we're going to do is kind of part interview, part just panelists. And I think in the end, the questions are just here to guide it, but Adam can easily entertain all of you with some stories about how it's going and what's happening in the trenches. Mike is another guy that I also saw at a previous event. Very fast thinker, very solid, has a background in the psychology realm. And he started applying these insights to gaming, essentially, or at least in the gaming experience. And he started doing this at Valve. So that's the company that many of you know behind Steam, for instance. And they're consistently doing experiments. And today he will speak mostly on what Valve is essentially doing in the brain-computer interface realm. But before that, we'll have a short introduction by Adam and Radhika. And they're both from NeuroTechAMS services, and they will explain a bit how all of this ties together. Because the thing is, if you have a big community like this, it's a waste to just have all the separate people there and not facilitate the connections in a way, right? So, Adam, I'll give it to you.
Thanks. Well, look, I'll introduce myself quickly, same for Radhika, and then we'll just show a couple of slides. Essentially, for myself, I started, I guess, getting involved with NeuroTechX about 4 years ago. Before that, my career was actually in finance and strategy. I namely worked for McKinsey for a couple of years, both in Canada and in New York. And the goal when I joined NeuroTechX was to support the community from a strategic perspective for all the chapters and all the activities. But very quickly, we had the objective to broaden the definition of what's a community. A community is people, it's startups, but there's this whole ecosystem too, where we can connect the talent that NeuroTechX has to different companies, different startups, or even to investors. And that would really make the ecosystem whole. So what we did a couple of years ago, we created NeuroTechX services. I'll get to that in a few seconds, but before that, maybe Radhika, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Adam. So I'm the head of business development for NeuroTechX services. My background is in marketing, but for the past 5 years, I've been working in investments where I managed a portfolio of $200 million. And my goal is to bring that kind of knowledge into the neurotech ecosystem and connect startups with investors, bring them some strategic insight from my experience and help them grow.
Thanks, Radhika. And so I'll share my screen very quickly. And then I'll let you share again. Can everyone see the first page? Yeah, perfect. So essentially, the narrative behind NeuroTech services, again, it's more about the market and the business, but at the same time, we also collaborate with both labs and corporates and startups. So this is a high level, gets us quite excited. North America, Europe, very strong market, very strong growth. And we actually think when we see market data that it's very underrated, it's underestimated. Why? Because you don't need that many very cool inventions and startups to completely change the dynamic here. We're in a young industry, but there's already a lot of traction. And so what we decided to do with Neurotech X Services is to really be 360. So we're all about neurotech, but within neurotech, because we leverage the talent from the community, we showed we have 16,000 members. Because we share the talent with companies, we can do it all. So strategic advisory, we've literally made 360 plans for startups or lab spin-offs that were contemplating growth or just even starting a new project. And it was from the strategy side, the operation side. As you can see on the investment and fundraising, we've helped company with their pitch decks, introduce them to investors, vice versa. We get a lot of investors that ask about the community and who they should talk to. So this is a way to do it in a structured fashion. Recruiting, we have a job board. We also provide headhunting, so tailored services. I know that Nurable actually, if I look at your team, I mean, Adam, maybe you can say a word on this later, but I think a lot of people actually come from Neurotech X. So this is something we wanted to make sure, again, was structured to support the companies properly. And then again, technical and engineering, science and research, and then anything around content creation. We have a lot of talent in the community, and we want to make sure that people get connected to the right things to do. So this is really how it works, right? On the left, as we're showing, we have our services, and on the right, we source talent from the different initiatives, which again allows people to grow. Then we have many interesting stories where someone might have started in a student club, then gone to a chapter, found an opportunity in a BCI project, whether software, hardware, and then this again kind of brings a full circle perspective on the opportunity we provide. And so honestly, the goal today was just to provide a high level perspective. We're showing the email on the top left, services@neurotechx.com. Please write to us if you have any question. I would say it could be either because you're looking for a job, because you're interested in doing maybe some consulting. But it could also be if you know some startups, if you're yourself managing a startup and you'd like some help. And in that regard, the goal is always to give back to the community and the people that help. So there's actually also a commission system in the situations where companies that might need help. The goal is for everyone to kind of benefit from that. And the final situation maybe that I would present is, we know there are a lot of people doing some consulting on their own, and sometimes they're presented with projects that seem a little too big or where, they might be missing a little piece of the puzzle. We're also open to that. If there's any way we can help and provide, the necessary complementary skill set, again, we have a very big community to draw support from, so we'll make sure to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Strong story. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that something like this should be there. And the more connections there are in these kind of ecosystems, the better. So thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Adam. Let's move on to Adam. All right, let's dive into it. So let's keep it very short at first. What is your kind of backstory? Can you explain a bit about what you did before this, how you got into Nurable, how you started this, and how you've experienced the past few years?
Yeah, so I have a somewhat atypical path to neurotechnology than I think most others find. But my longer story short was that when I had graduated and then I was doing consulting, behavioral consulting. And I realized that I wanted to do something. I had this idea that I wanted to pursue. I'm a first generation American. My parents, they did not go to university. They barely even finished high school. So I didn't have a set track ahead of me in terms of you should be a doctor, you should be a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. My parents actually started a company together, small local business, but entrepreneurship was the only thing that I had ever had a perspective of. So I remember when I was doing consulting, I had this position already. I was at this crossroads where, do I want to continue doing this? Do I maybe go to grad school and learn, which I love, and get an even better job? Or do I pursue this crazy idea that I have And I realized that it was only at this point in time that I had the fewest obligations to other people, that it allowed me to realize that I could do the other two options at any point in my life. So I took the plunge. I started a mobile app company, which was doing pretty well. And I moved back to my university, or where I went to like poach a bunch of technical talent. I had a technical co-founder who was a senior, I can't see the question, but anyways, who was a senior in computer science. And we were supposed to launch the app on a Monday. And on Friday, he came to me, he goes, Adam, he was international. He goes, I spoke with an immigration lawyer, and she told me that if we were to launch this app without going through all of this kinds of paperwork, it could affect my visa status in the future. And he was a pretty safe person regardless. And we knew that this was a possibility, although a small one. So he actually ended up walking away from the company with all the source code. And I was not able to launch the product. And I had the demo day because I was in an incubation only several months later, and I didn't have time to rebuild the whole company. This is all relevant because I was then hired by the director of the incubation lab to help co-run it. And in that lab, there was this one crazy guy, this one individual who by far and large was the most visionary, the most professional, even though he was his final year neuroscience PhD. He was so clearly ahead of the 20 other companies that were in the cohort. And that guy is Dr. Ramses Alkate. So he and the one founder of Nurable at this point in time. So I've been working with him and all the other companies, and he was helping me out. And Ramses was followed by a group of PhDs, MBAs, every CS student. He had all of the people at the University of Michigan interested in trying to get involved with him because the technology that he had was so promising. And when he spoke, you could really understand the vision and know that this guy was going to realize it. Fast forward, there was an incident. I remember I was walking out of the office, and I remember Ramses with his like cohort of groupies, if you will, like all of these people that Nurable like wanted to be a part of it. Ramses was like, Adam, you should join us. And I was like, Ramses, just like, don't forget the little people when you're all big and successful. Fast forward to several months later, and I was a little depressed. My company had just fallen apart several months before. I didn't know if I wanted to stay in Michigan where my university was. I was thinking about taking a job with Techstars in South Africa. I had just been dumped. It was just like all of these forces like working against me. And I remember that Ramses had mentioned what I thought was jokingly about me joining Nurable, but I sent him a message saying, hey, Ramses, I don't know if you were kidding or not, but if you were serious, I would love for you to have me. And he sent me back a message immediately. This is 2015, I think. He was at South by Southwest. He's like, look, I'm out of town at the moment, but I get back on Monday. Let's talk about it. But the bottom line is I want you part of the team. And the rest is history from there. I mean, it's been a lot of ups and downs, but I guess that's my long-winded, atypical route to neurotechnology, where Ramses was like, you want to control shit with your mind? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Because my academic background is more in the psychology. I specialized in environmental science. I was working with utility companies about how to change behavior to have people act more sustainably. Ryan, it is insane. I skipped the detail about the time where I was homeless and I was working 3 jobs to get my other company going, but that's a story for another day. Let's go back into the neurotech gaming fold of things.
Very nice. Very unconventional story indeed, but very often that brings you the most unique experience in a way, right? And from that moment that you joined on, like what's the kind of like role that you fulfilled within the company, and what are the things that you have done so far in the past few years? Not you as a person alone, but like as a team, right? As a company.
Yeah. So Ramses was like, he had his MBA student, he had his savant computer science individual, He's like, Adam, I want you to be my people person. I was like, I don't know what that means, but okay. And what that evolved to is that I've since essentially taken over the entire business development aspect of the company. And what we've accomplished as a team, and our team has grown considerably, and plugging NTX real quick, we've hired at least 3 of our members from the organization. It always feels better when you can go through your network and you have someone that you know is already invested to building this neurotechnology future. But reeling it back to the team and what we've done, not that this is really accomplishment, but we've raised over $15 million to date. In 2007, well, actually, let me back up. So the whole reason why Ramsey's had all of this interest to begin with was he had this ability to identify a P300 faster than any lab had been able to, first with wet sensors, but then we moved it to a dry sensor system. And with that, we were able to raise our first round of funding in 2016. In 2017, we debuted the virtual reality integration that we built with HTC Vive, with the HTC team, putting dry electrodes in the occipital region so that we could essentially use the P300 detection to have hands-free control. And all of this was because, well, one, we're all gamers at heart. 2 was we identified that every evolution in computing has this companion interaction that makes it all come together. If we look at the personal computer, computers were filled in warehouses fed with punch cards and required especially specialized knowledge in order to be able to operate them and get the value out of it. And then it wasn't until the keyboard, GUI, and mouse that people like me, lay individuals, were actually able to take advantage of the technology. And we see something similar happen with smartphones, where before the iPhone had the capacitive touchscreen, smartphone technology had existed about a decade before, but it wasn't until we had this really smooth interface that we could take advantage of the full medium. And what we see as we have every evolution in computing, the gap between man and machine diminishes to a point where we literally touch and speak to our devices. So our bet back in 2016 with the ability to do hands-free control was that immersive computing, virtual, but especially augmented reality, that was getting like historical records of investor fundings of billions of dollars, was that we could use the fact that that virtual reality requires a head-mounted system to sneak in these weird-looking dry sensors and create some value. And what that brought us to was 2017, where we debuted this game called The Awakening to showcase the interactions that we built. Now, this is the part where I start to what's it called? Temper myself, right? Where it's like, first I'm going to sound like I'm bragging, but then I'm going to knock myself back. So we showed this demo at SIGGRAPH, which is the premier 3D graphics interactions conference. We got the cover of the New York Times. We got to speak with every company, every investor that we could ever want. But one of the problems that we realized was that we built a really amazing demo with a really amazing technology from a technologist perspective, but we didn't actually build a good product for the actual end user. We were using medical grade dry sensors for a consumer gamer who doesn't want to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. And for the research community, we optimized for the gamer. So we optimized with the user experience in mind. So it wasn't robust enough for that to stand as a product. And I say all this because it's really necessary to help explain what Nurable's been up to for the past 3 years. And Bayram led with me essentially fucking up, committing to this conference, but then being like, oh shit. The reason why I'm so crunched is because literally a week from today is when we have a special technology announcement. And that's essentially the culmination of 3 years of development. And depending on how I feel, I might give you a sneak peek. We'll see. But basically what we realized was that Neurable's goal is to create a world without limitations. In order to do so, we needed to hit a lot more people than we were currently able to do so. Virtual reality has a much larger install base than it did back in 2016, but we needed to be much bigger than that. And we needed to be much more cost effective. So we've been innovating for the past 3 years in one, what were people asking for, not forgetting what is our roots and what we want to overall accomplish, which is this world without limitations. And two, how can we actually get this product into the hands of individuals? When we look at consumer BCI, which is, excuse my language, really fucking hard. It is really hard to do BCI in the first place. There's a reason why Elon Musk is the only person that's getting the ton of attention. It's because he's able to. It's really difficult. And even then, there are some other things to keep in mind. But what we see with consumer technology is a lot of people doing a lot of good work, but you have to sacrifice something because there's so many trade-offs. Because you want it to be an inexpensive system, you end up using lower quality sensors. If you have lower quality sensors, your algorithms aren't going to perform as well. If your algorithms aren't performing as well, then you have to lean into the gimmicky part to get sales going, because all of these are companies and need to produce value at the end of the day. Nurable's been fortunate enough that we've been able to stand on 5 years of development, plus millions of dollars of funding from investors who believe in what we're doing, as well as attention from the community and what that is. So what we are building right now is the idea of the everyday brain-computer interface. What is something that you can wear today, that you'll wear consistently, that you can see that it's working, you can have reproducible results, and it's giving a value. Keeping in mind that all of this is like, it's not magic. Like, there has to be a trade-off. The trade-off is that it's going to start simple, but what we've built is a system that's going to grow over time. And what that system is going to be able to do is give you basic hands-free control, not necessarily as elegant as the P300 work that we're doing, but that's not forgotten about either. In my opinion, actually even more performant. And then also some kind of cognitive state analysis. And now this is a great opportunity for me to tie it back into gaming, because Nurable sees gaming and technology is not really a different thing, but like gaming is a vehicle to take the innovations from technology and make them enjoyable. And you often find that gamers are early adopters. I have a really cool story about Palmer Luckey that I can share later if we have time for it. But so what we're doing is we're looking at the spectrum, right? Where it's on this side of the spectrum, it's hands-free control. Think about interactions, telekinesis. And on this side, we think about effective computing. How can computers understand cognitive activity to a degree where we can use that kind of information to influence what's going on in the gaming experience? Where for this product, it's not necessarily as super engineered for gaming as the virtual reality system was. It's more for constant user benefit, but the capability and potential is definitely there. So we're looking at specifically different kind of attention modalities and how we can use that and understand it so that the end user can kind of get some kind of benefit from it. But that's like the boring stuff that's here today. Let's talk about where this could go in the near future. Actually, I don't know if you want to ask me a question. I can ramble on till the.
No, I love this rambling. Like you're doing this for me. It's perfect. Yeah. I'm listening, and honestly, it's a great story. Like it's very interesting to hear. For the people that don't know, by the way, Palmer Luckey that you mentioned, he's the guy that started Oculus, right? Read the book History of the Future. Great book as well. But no, please, perfect. That was essentially how you got into this, how you got started, why you chose gaming initially, why you shifted a bit and took the invariant element out of it. Essentially, like, okay, so what of the brain-computer interface can be used in many different applications? And you were about to talk about where this is going. And what I would also love to hear is, where could this go for gaming?
Sure. I have two. So like for me, I can think about them in my head. I'm a visual thinker. Two diagrams that really help understand where I see BCI and gaming going. And it's this one spectrum where it's like passive versus active, where active more is looking at hands-free control versus passive, which is looking at more like, and when I say, I'm going to use this word because there isn't really a great alternative, emotional spectrum, but emotion is extremely difficult to measure, especially with non-invasive sensors. We don't even really know what emotion is also. So it's like, it's very difficult. But so I'll use like emotional analysis at the other side, of the passive side. So I think that gaming will start to feature initially basic controls. And I think the killer one will be a simple click, a selection. And there are selections that you can do with eye tracking. There are selections that you can obviously do with hands-free or like imagine gestures. But we think for the real, to really capture that value, you're going to want some kind of mental click. So and that's going to work synergistically with all of these other interaction modalities. So that's on one side of the spectrum. And then the other side is this idea of passive, where it's like, imagine a story, an immersive story where you're walking through this virtual world and the characters are actually able to understand, even if they could understand a simple degree of emotional state, it would make that much, like Pixar would like it would blow their mind. They would be able to create such an interesting narrative. I remember one of the use cases that we talked about, but it was a little bit too hard to build into like a error-free experience, was the idea of using P300 for event detection, meaning that one of the ideas that we talked about earlier on was in virtual reality. Imagine if you're in a story and whether or not you saw the killer hide a knife, the story went one way or another. And that's really interesting things that you can do when you have access to quality brain data. So that's this one visual that I have, this active to passive time, not spectrum rather. And then the other one is this idea of by with for. Technology that is operated by us, whether it's our smartphone, our keyboard, that's what we know most commonly. We are seeing examples of technology that works with us right now. And my best analogy, example is suggestive typing, where there is predictive search for what it thinks you're about to type and what clues you're giving the machine. So that's the machine working with you that has direct analog to gaming. And then the last one is for us. How can systems understand us to a degree that they actually operate before we're able to fully understand our intention? And we saw this a little bit with the P300 because it's associated with intent. It's a subconscious response. It's not, we used it as an active control input, but it's not actually an active response. It's not like, I want a P300 now I'm going to click a button. It's like, this button means something to me. And because there's a specific there's a stimulation on it, and we have the time signature, we know which is the thing that was most interesting to you or like of interest to you. So I think that there's huge promise for BCI and gaming. I think the most important thing though is that BCI is really hard, and we need to very much temper our expectations. Like there are videos of Nurable at SIGGRAPH in 2017 where you have people who've been in the emerging tech world for decades say that this was the craziest virtual reality experience they've ever had. And that's what it was. It was a really awesome experience, but it was very simple, and it's going to start simple. And those simple but well executed applications, I think, are what's going to move the field more than these like big claims that we're going to have full magical powers and systems that fully understand us right off the bat, because that's just not going to be the case. And to some extent, it raises expectations too high. It's like if you watch Ready Player One as your first experience of virtual reality ever, and then you try the original Oculus, you're gonna be like, what the fuck is this? I was promised this vision, this magical universe, and I'm getting which to technologists is still state of the art, is still groundbreaking, but it's just a mismatch in expectations. And I think that's one of the most important things that I can talk about.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. totally agreed on the high expectations, right? It's only logical, don't get me wrong. I think this is a topic that gets people extremely excited, right? So then it's simple. Okay, what is there to do, right? But okay, let's say that we indeed have an audience here. The audience wants to know, what can they expect? What would be your you might be preaching to the choir, but like, what would you say is will be possible for, let's say, the average consumer in the upcoming 3 to 5 years? Or feel free to change the time frame or anything along those lines. What kind of like guidance or pointers would you give to people to actually have a realistic estimation of what might happen?
So if we think of that as a system, right? We aren't going, and Mike can talk about this later because I know he's got a collaboration with OpenBCI. We are limited by the amount of hardware that currently exists, because at the end of the day, in order for a brain to computer interface, you need something to be able to communicate something from the brain to the computer, which is why Nurable has had to build hardware every step of the way, even though our whole goal was to be hardware agnostic and only build software when we first started out. We had this lovely realization that everyone at home doesn't necessarily have an EEG system. Even people who have EEG systems, one system is different from the other, which means that you can't even actually use them. There isn't really a standard. And even if electrode locations are different, then that's already a completely different piece of hardware. So I'll start with, in 3 to 5 years, it's going to be dependent on what kind of hardware we see come out. So I think with that, we can definitely expect some very basic understanding of cognition, and that's what Nurable's working on a lot. And so, like, I'm working with the US Air Force and a couple other performance organizations to see how we can use measures of cognitive state to boost performance, to help people train better. One of my favorite ideas and things that I can't wait to work on is this idea of flow state, which is still not necessarily defined in the academic community, but there definitely is general consensus from psychology that people learn best when there is an amount of stress present, but not too much that it's debilitating, that it's actually preventing longer term memory encoding, that there's a sweet spot. Dr. Mihaly, I cannot pronounce his last name, even though I am
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
There we go. Are you a Hungarian?
No, I just read the book and I get obsessed with these kind of names. So yes.
Yeah, so he's a Hungarian psychologist, and he has this diagram where on the x-axis it's ease of activity, and the top one is performance. So what you see is as something gets, difficulty of activity and performance. As something gets more difficult, it's harder to perform. But if you can stay within this sweet spot, then that is what they dictate as flow state. And when you have a measure of attention or stress, you can start to inform that in a way that games specifically or a training protocol can adaptively change to keep you in the specialized state. And I think that is really sweet. And then I think in terms of control interactions, we'll see some, it's not that, I think the way that we'll see BCI manifest, and I say this because I went through 2.5 years of working with this virtual reality product. It's not that we're going to give you an interaction that you already know. You're not going to replace a button click with a mental click. Your finger is going to move faster. It's sub 100 milliseconds to P300, for example, that is 300 milliseconds at a minimum. So what I think we'll see is we'll use these signals in new ways. And that's going to make us feel things that we haven't been able to feel before. I gave another Neurotech gaming presentation for NTX a while ago, and I used the example of the Stanley Parable, where I don't know how many of you have played it, but basically it's this very interesting game where, very simple, and you're just navigating an office space. And based off the movements that you're inputting to the device and how long your character is looking in a direction, the narrator will actually anticipate what you're doing to a point where it feels like they're reading your mind. And that's a really special feeling that we can get so much better at with BCI, because that's just using basic analog input. But when we think about having actual biological input, when we think about eye tracking, when we think about cognitive states, that's gonna get really wild. I've always laughed about the idea that Nurable right now could probably create the scariest video game of all time. If we wanted to, we could make you shit your pants. And there's so much that we can do there. So yeah, I think it'll come down to two things. One is the availability of hardware, and obviously the level of performance of that hardware. And then two, the creativity that goes behind thinking about how these different types of signals can be used in the way that feel best to the end user.
Clear. Thank you very much. I think these are some good pointers. What I'll do, I see that we have two questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to ask those. One from Ryan. For you, what are your views on having invasive and non-invasive technologies? That's question A. And then question B is, how far would you like to see neurotech progress in terms of, would you like it to be inside the game? And I assume that means anticipating what the user is doing and making sure that the game can respond to it, or just controlling games with the mind.
Ooh, for the first question, invasive versus non-invasive. I should start off with, I am not a neuroscientist. I've just been working with them for half a decade, so I know enough to be dangerous. But from my perspective, I don't see invasive BCI in any realm of feasibility in other than medical applications. Until we can have it as mundane a procedure as getting a root canal, or I don't know, a basic visit to the dentist, we're not going to have mass adoption of that. It would need to have such an insane benefit to the end user that, which has its own like world of ethical conundrums that I'm not gonna get to right now. But I think that invasive is still so far, and that there's still so much progress we can make with non-invasive system, that's where my attention goes to. So it's not that I'm saying that it won't or will happen. I don't see it happening in the next 5 years for anyone that doesn't have like a severe disability. And my focus is on the non-invasive side, and I do see where all of that potential is. Like one of the quick analogies that I give is that what Nurable is doing, and how I think we've been doing well for ourselves, is following what Fitbit and Apple have done, where they snuck pedometer, electrocardiogram, all of these different sensors into a watch, that they put it in. And this is somewhere where consumer BCIs don't quite get it yet. Fortunately, I think we can change that script 1 week from today. But people, aside from the hardcore fans, are not going to wear something that's socially different. That's been proven time and again in various industries. And I can tell you it has happened in BCI as well. So first and foremost, it needs to work with our current lifestyle. And then what else? And the second question was, am I interested in interactions or the full spectrum of cognitive computing and how that'll affect gaming?
On point.
Both, absolutely both. And something that a realization I came to early on at Nurable was that the two are not different. The two are actually just the same. They're just different sides of the same coin. Because at the end of the day, they both rely on being able to interpret signals that originate from the brain. Now, I will color this though, that when people think about BCI, especially people who don't know it, so maybe not people in this chat, but like if you were to speak about it to anyone else, when they hear neurotechnology, their mind goes, telekinesis, Magneto, Harry Potter, like the things that are shown by the social zeitgeist of our times, because most people don't fully understand what it means. When we think about brain activity, specifically data that originates from the brain that can be read with non-invasive sensors, that is not sophisticated necessarily. It is more akin to a muscle that we are listening to, and we're seeing how this muscle operates. And I think this comes down to the ways that we understand brain activity. We understand brain activity through these frequency bands. It's a little bit different if you're talking about FNIRs, and then if we're getting into magnetic resonance, blah, blah, blah. But the TLDR is that the brain data doesn't actually convey as rich information as you would get from a magneto-like world. That's why when we have these kind of developments, we'll have to build with the limitations in mind. It is a little bit different when we talk about invasive, but that I still think is many years away from us. So when it comes to gaming, I'm super looking forward to the interactions. I know already from personal experience that they can feel magical. And I think that creative applications of basic cognitive state understanding is going to make for potentially a full new genre of gaming. For a full new experience. I think something that virtual reality was they really brought about these narrative experiences where you're not necessarily playing with the character. It's like halfway between a game and a movie where you're now involved with the plot, but you're not actually affecting it. So I see from that perspective, one, it's just such an interesting opportunity. But now when you think that you can actually plug input of how the end user is feeling, wow.
Yeah. Totally. The cognitive side is not to be underestimated, I think. The second you can break that open, there's so many elements of cognitive psychology and how people tend to think in general that you can take into account. If you have some kind of like sensor, essentially, right? So the computer can recognize what's going on. Okay, nice. Thank you very much.
Actually, to that point, and it's something I've picked up on with my billions of conversations I've had at Nurable, is that interactions are just easier to imagine than understanding the brain. There is no inherent feedback with brain activity. It's not like your heartbeat where you can feel it pounding faster or a muscle that's sore. You could do retroactive reflection, or some people who are really good at meditation can be present and somewhat feel what's going on. But there's still no actual physical sensation of brain activity. You don't know what an alpha state necessarily feels like, or changes in alpha frequency. But yeah, so I think most people will think about interactions because measured cognition is kind of an abstract idea. But the moment that we're able to wield that, oh yeah, that's gonna be cool.
Totally agreed. I'm right there. We'll see that once it arrives. Nice. Another question. How do you handle motion artifact when people are walking? Yeah, essentially that. A bit more technical.
Motion artifacts exist. It is that's just a thing of that's just how your body works. Like if you move, there's going to be an electric signal that is also going to be present where there's an EEG signal. So what we do is we try to, first is just limit movement. So Ramsey is my co-founder, our CEO. He worked with ambulatory EEG back in his days in the lab at the University of Michigan. So we have a lot of insight about artifact rejection. And it's a lot about how can you work with that coming in mind. And then also with Nurable, we actually lean into artifacts. So turn that into a positive. But I'll talk about that in about 1 week's time. In terms of artifact, we built a series of algorithms for artifact rejection to cleverly be able to take it out of EEG data to compensate for that. And a couple of other things that one, I just shouldn't talk about because it's sensitive, but two, I'm not an engineer and I would totally butcher it.
I think this is a very solid answer for someone who's head of partnerships. So thank you still.
You can't not be involved with the science if you're trying to make things happen with the technology.
Yeah, totally. But I think there's a difference between understanding the basics and being able to communicate them simply. And that's something that you're good at, right? So thank you for that still.
I actually have my name on a Nurable patent. And it's one of the most things I've ever been pleased about. I was actually able to contribute to the field of science. I could die happy now.
Yeah, well, welcome. That's good to hear. Another very interesting question from Nick. How well do BCIs currently capture neurodiversity? And he mentions that he has aphantasia, so very low or zero visual imagination. And he mentioned that you mentioned that you're very visual in your thinking. So is there anything that will be connected to this? How do you view this?
I have like an annoying answer that's the more real answer, and then I'll try to address it. The annoying answer is that we don't really know yet. That we can see what's happening in laboratory studies, and we have all of that information available to us. But one of the limitations and BCI, especially Nurable's opportunity, is that we're building a device that you're going to wear constantly, or much more constantly than you ever have with an EEG system ever before. So I think we'll start to understand all of these neurodivergent details and correlates in ways that we haven't really been able to previously. My other answer is that from our experience so far, we make sure that we're collecting a diverse enough set of individuals from how we do our data collection that we take some of that into account. And my hypothesis is that it would work similarly or the same, but the insights that we would gather over time might be a little bit different, as they would be different for anyone else. Neurodiversity is something Nurable is really on top of, where it means a lot to us. It's part of our idea of a world without limitations. So I'm sorry I can't give a more rich answer, but I am definitely excited to see how we can uncover those details.
Clear, very good. Yeah, it's a very complex topic, right? So it's only logical that we haven't solved all of it yet. But as long as there's progress and that you're working on it, that's the thing. Nice. Also, and someone was very happy with the answer, so that's good. Another question. Maarten loves the flow direction, and I'm right there with Maarten. So what are your ideas currently on how to operationalize the flow?
If you have an input that shows how someone is faring with difficulty, right? Whether that's a stress correlate, an attention correlate, an effort correlate, looking at cognitive load, there are a lot of things that have been proven in laboratories. And that's Neurable's strategy. We look at what has been done in labs and try to replicate them with more accessible technology. So if you have an input that somewhat infers dealing with difficulty, you can build a system that adaptively changes difficulty to keep you in a stage where you're trying to learn at your best level. And I think back to Ryan's question about different kinds of brains and how people think and learn, people learn very differently. And I think with this kind of information, we can start to uncover a little bit more objectively how people learn and cater specifically to those individuals. I am pitching right now to a couple of really cool education companies ideas of how we could use our announcement next week, that technology to actually help do this from a real tangible perspective. But it's a great question.
Nice. I think that's a great segue to something that you mentioned before. And I know that the entire audience is curious because I've seen it at least twice in the chat. You mentioned that depending on your mood, you might be able to share slightly more about next week. So what is your current mood and what can you share? I think that's that's the key question, right? What do you want people to think about in this case?
I have two questions.
Go for it.
One is, can we stop recording or pause recording?
Yes. I do want to get a confirmation from Brian, because I think you're also here.
You don't need to do it yet, because I have a second question. The second question is, can I share my screen?
Yes, absolutely. The second one, absolutely. Let me see. I think you already have the capability to share your screen. And I can stop recording.
I think you can pause recording.
I have. And we're back. I think we're back live. There we go. Okay, very nice. Thank you. Well, I think we're also near the end. So maybe a good question is like, is there any topic that we haven't touched on which you would like to touch, or is there any thought that you would like to leave the audience with?
Just that this is the future. It's really hard, and it will require people like you, me, everyone on this call putting in their mental energy to help get it to this vision that we all have and want to create. And with that comes all of the benefits. And then the last thing is that, like, with that in mind, it's also up to us to make sure that we're doing this ethically, that we are building a future that we want to see. And I can't speak for other people, but I can at least speak for myself and Nurable, that our goal is to help set the guardrails right now that others will have to follow in the future to make sure, to make sure that we're respecting people's data. Even if brain data doesn't necessarily mean that much right now, and you can get more information from a smartphone behavior, it doesn't matter because people still care. And the fact that people still care is enough for us to care. So those are my last plugs. If you want to get involved with Nurable, reach out to me. It's very easy. It's just Adam@Nurable. It's probably why I get so much spam. We're constantly expanding our team. We're currently at 18 right now. We have remote positions, but generally we're also just interested with anyone that's trying to push the field further. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it was a pleasure, and thank you very much for making the time and being so flexible in terms of, you got great improvisational skills, sir. Absolutely. And it was very good to see this. I see a lot of thank yous in the chat, so that's very, very good. I
have to apologize because of the nature of this week. I have to duck out. As much as I would love to see this, I know that it's being recorded, so I will follow up. Again, if anyone wants to reach out to me, please, I'm Adam@Nurable.com. Happy to stay in touch. And Barum and the rest of the NeuroTechX Amsterdam crew, you rock. Oh, one NTX plug. If any of you are writers or have written anything BCI, neurotechnology, anything related, I also, taking off my Nurable hat, putting on my NTX hat, I also run something called the Content Laboratory, where we help people in the NTX community write original content about their work, their experience, their ideas, anything from neurofiction to state analysis of different frequency domains. Anything in between. So if you're interested in writing, or if you have written content before, shoot me a DM. I'm in the Slack group, and I'd love to get that going too. But now I'll really jump off.
Thank you very much. And I can attest, I read some of these articles. They were great. So yes. Right. Good luck with the rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. And there we go. On to the second session. I also see Mike live. I hope we got to all the questions. I think we did, mostly. Mike, I see that you're not muted, so that's good.
No. Hey.
Hey. And we don't see your camera yet.
It says the host has stopped it.
That is probably my issue. And now I've made you co-host, and now you can share your screen. And there we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. We all see you. Happy to have you, Mike. Thank you. I will give the word to you. Looking forward to this.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Barum. I caught I guess the tail end of Adam's talk. And so my guess is some of this might be redundant, but maybe you guys can take the redundancy as kind of evidence of at least, I guess, the optimism we both have about where things might go. Okay, I'll just get to it. My name is Mike Ambinder. I'm an experimental psychologist at Valve. For those of you unfamiliar with Valve, we're a video game company, make games, make VR hardware, and we have a digital download platform called Steam where we sell games. So I guess I've been at Valve since 2008, worked on applying knowledge and methodologies from psychology to game design, do a bunch of statistical analysis as well. And a while ago, we started working on what we called biofeedback, and that kind of went away. And then we've kind of returned to it in the last couple of years, I guess, kind of under the auspices of brain-computer interface research. And so we are very curious about what might be possible in the future with BCIs. And so this talk is kind of, I guess, giving you insight into why we see the potential there and why we find them interesting, and maybe give a sense of where things might go in the future. So let's see. So yeah, the motivating question for us is, again, how will you interact with technology in 10 years? You might think of things like VR, potentially AR, maybe something like Minority Report, maybe something we haven't thought of. For us, though, if you ask somebody the question of what is your ideal interface, like when you ask someone to say, okay, how would you like to interact with technology in the future? Lots of people come back to the I think a thing and it happens, right? To just having machines that know what you intend to do, what you want to do, and then using that to kind of make a decision and then give you feedback as a consequence. And so for us, BCI seemed to be, I guess, one of the more likely scenarios. Right now, BCI research is almost in its infancy. Maybe it's kind of emerging from somewhat of an embryonic stage, but we're in the beginning. We're not in the middle, and we're not in the end. And so just trying to figure out what might be possible down the line, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years from now, is pretty interesting. And for us anyway, trying to figure out, okay, well, let's see if there's potential here. Let's see if we can do work in this space and kind of get to a point where, BCIs can kind of, start fulfilling some of the potential that we might see in them, or we might hit a roadblock and say, this is not where we need to go. Don't want to put the cart before the horse, but given the work that we've done, I guess we remain fairly optimistic. And so it is nice to see kind of more interest in this space, and hopefully more smart people coming together and solving problems in this space. So for us, we want to be proactive. We want to figure out where things might go. And BCI is one possible direction. So just to give you guys kind of a quick overview of the talk, I'll give a brief introduction of BCIs and then talk about 2 out of the 3 main reasons why we find them, I guess, so tantalizing. One are improvements to our playtesting processes. The other is designing a gameplay that adapts in real time. I'm going to skip discussion at the moment for kind of the interface replacements, or the quote unquote true BCI. The think a thing and it happens kind of approach. We're very far away from that, but we can make steps along the way, and so we don't need kind of like, it's not a step function. The hope is that gradual progress can be made, or incremental progress can be made to get to the kind of like the end goal of this ideal interface. And so we're focusing on somewhat of the more short-term approaches, and the hopes that eventually we can kind of get to the longer term, true BCI. So here's my definition of a brain-computer interface, just so we're all on the same page. I'm sure many people on this talk may have different or better ones. That's fine. But for me anyway, a communication pathway that translates neuronal or neurological signals into actionable input for some form of external system. And maybe to kind of make things clear, like when I say BCI, I'm not just speaking about brain signals, right? There's a wealth of information that as game designers we don't currently get from the player, and we don't currently detect or design towards. And so the question we have is that what changes about gameplay or game design when we can incorporate information about a player's internal state? This talk will kind of focus on information acquired from the brain, via potentially EEG or other modalities. But in a sense, when you say BCI, you could be referring to almost any interface, right? Like you think about a traditional, game controller, for example. That's a BCI in some sense, because you're taking, cognitive intent from the player. I want to move this direction. I want to jump. I want to reload, whatnot, and translating it into a signal that the game, recognizes, and then gives you feedback, gives you visual stimuli on screen or auditory stimuli, and you respond. So in one respect, every interface is a brain-computer interface, but I guess we're talking kind of maybe more rigorously these days about what a BCI actually is. And it is possible that we might be able to accrue a lot of the potential benefits about what I'm going to describe today by not measuring brain signals directly. You can think about, webcams perhaps, or heart rate monitors, galvanic skin response, eye trackers, other things, posture. So what truly matters is having a reliable way of recording information about a player's cognition or emotion or experience, however we can get it. And I'll walk you through kind of what we think might be interesting ways of, using that data. So let's start with an analogy. I find this kind of useful to at least set the stage for some of our thinking in this space. So if you think about a conversation, so the top part of the screen, it's composed of both verbal and nonverbal information. So the verbal, the actual like words that I'm saying, and then the nonverbal, right, is my tone of voice, my posture, my facial expressions, the way, if I'm angled towards you, angled away from you, maybe the prior context we have, whether I'm using sarcasm or irony. The sum total of a conversation is composed of both verbal and nonverbal components. And so the analogy I would want to draw is that, maybe games today at the moment are composed of traditional inputs. So again, what you get from a mouse and a keyboard or a gamepad or a VR controller or whatnot, but something might be missing. And so our hypothesis is this, that if you add in traditional inputs and physiological data, well, then you can create a fuller sense of gameplay. You can create new kinds of games, right? So just as a conversation without nonverbal signals is lacking a whole bunch of information, well, gameplay could be lacking a whole bunch of information that could give you kind of the sum total of a gameplay experience that would not be possible to exist without physiological data. And so for us, we're hopeful that by adding in physiological data, gameplay can evolve in ways that are meaningful, and the full suite of gameplay experiences can be realized or achieved. And so, yeah, this kind of just is a summary question about, kind of reinforces the point I was making on the previous slide, is what about all the data we're missing from the player's experience? So, we know what players are trying to do in game, for the most part. Like, again, I sense it, move to the left, reload your weapon, make a selection and so forth. But we don't know how they feel about doing it. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they engaged or detached? Are they challenged or bored? Are they frustrated? Are they curious? Are they exploring or solving puzzles or goofing off? Are they playing seriously? Are they learning? Are they forgetting? Are they distracted? Are they remembering something? Are they speaking to a friend? Are they getting angrier? Are they getting happier? All sorts of useful information or reputatively useful information that we don't currently have access to. And so, we think that interesting things can happen when we start asking these questions and maybe seeing if we can actually measure some of these things. And so, and again, I'll give you more specific examples down the talk. Right now I'm just trying to kind of, maybe kind of, build a framework for you guys to understand, at least at a high level, why we think this is interesting. So, the corollary or the follow-on from that hypothesis, or that question, I guess, would be, do we get an improved player experience if we can measure internal states or emotion or cognition or decisions? So the main thesis we have, and just to be clear about it, is that having access to additional axes of information from the player will be useful for us. And so let's just start walking through why this might be the case. So what can we measure today? There's a whole bunch of research that's been done in laboratory about all kinds of things, like mental workload, engagement, arousal, learning, where you're attending, novelty, surprise, all aspects of spatial attention. We don't always get these signals reliably, but people have shown that they can do them, fairly consistently, at least in laboratory experiments, right? So you're in a lab, you're wearing an electrode, setup of some kind. It's likely a wet electrode setup with gel, so your hair gets messy, and people have you do a repetitive task, 500 times, and with one difference between conditions, and they can extract, various measures of things that will be of interest to us, right? There's a big difference between what is possible in the lab and what would be viable for a consumer product, right? I can't ask somebody to, use a wet electrode EEG system and then, spend a half an hour doing training to maybe play a gameplay experience that is slightly improved. That doesn't work. And so the hope is that we can translate some of these laboratory findings into, real world instantiations of something that is quick, easy, convenient, and an obvious improvement over current generation gameplay. So people have shown that things can be done under idealized conditions. And then for us, the trick is saying, okay, how do we translate those idealized conditions into something more approximate to what somebody would be doing when they're playing on their couch or sitting in front of their computer? So let's get into the kind of the two of the three main reasons why we find BCI-based approaches so interesting. So for us, playtesting. If you're familiar with Valve, to the extent that you like Valve games, the reason that Valve makes good games is because we playtest. We playtest as early as we can, as often as we can, and that's why, essentially that's why our games turn out the way that they do. So for those unfamiliar with playtesting, essentially, what it is, well, essentially it's trying to apply the scientific method to game design. So every game design we have is a hypothesis. Here's the thing we think might be fun or interesting for players. The playtests are our experiments. So we put the game in front of somebody who is not us, and we gather their feedback. And then we iterate and improve the game as a consequence of that feedback, right? So this is the same way that science works. We're just applying it in an applied context in the context of games. And so all we do is we have game designs, we test them with people who are not us. We see if the game designs are working, try and figure out why, and then continue improving the game. Or if they figure out that they're not working, then we make a change and then we try again. And so we just keep doing this until we get to a point where people seem to be very much enjoying the game. This is how we make our games. It seems to work well. And it follows kind of the methodologies that have been established thousands of years ago when people were like first interested in kind of rational thought and trying to be empirical about knowledge generation. So for us, playtesting is essentially the kind of the foundation of the work that we do. And so anything we could do to improve that process ideally would help us make better games. So traditional playtesting approaches are, here's a list of some of the following. This is not an exhaustive list, but just kind of gives you some insight. So direct observation is, again, what I was kind of just describing, putting people in front of the game and watching them play. We have Q&As, we have surveys. We're actually, measuring a bunch of gameplay data, and we can do this with the population at large. Once the game is released, we can be measuring a whole bunch of, acquiring a bunch of information about what a player is doing. And then there are usability and HCI-based approaches people use to evaluate things as well. These are all great. But there are issues, right? If you're asking people questions, I'm a psychologist. I'm happy to tell you about all the ways in which people will kind of rationalize or invent or lie, confabulate, or forget things. We're not always great at telling you why we do what we do. We can also only measure what we can record, so we can record a whole bunch of gameplay data, but there's lots that we don't get access to. We can know what people do in our games. It might be hard to know why sometimes. We also lack moment-to-moment insight. If I have you play a game for an hour and then at the end I'm asking you questions, you might have forgotten something that happened, 20 minutes in. Or you might have been severely impacted by something that happened at the end, and if the end was really negative and the first 58 minutes were great, well, you might take away that, yeah, it wasn't so great because the end sucked. It's also impractical to do a bunch of studies with large sample sizes. We have limited time, limited resources, and we want to gather as much data as we can, but doing this kind of with larger sample sizes where we could get potentially cleaner data is not always practical. So here are issues, right? And then I guess the thesis I would make is that BCIs can help us solve a bunch of these issues. And so here's a kind of a quick list of 6 different ways in which we think BCIs could help us. I'll go through them all on the kind of the next set of slides, but just really quickly, we do think we can get moment-to-moment insight and get more objective data and do this at scale and get obviously different kinds of data we wouldn't have access to. We can do this over time, and then we also get to pair this with all of the existing methodologies. So it's not a substitution or a replacement; it's an addition. Hopefully, an incremental and maybe a significant improvement. So let's go through them one by one. So for us, we would love to gain a real-time understanding of a player's emotional state, moment by moment, second by second. We could get a response to individual components of gameplay. So as game designers, just think about that for a second. We can see how a player reacts to a specific enemy or a chat message or a bullet firing, a puzzle solving, a death kill, a piece of art, a level change. What happens is that we eliminate gross responses. Oh, I like this or I didn't. And we're determining the components that led to the overall impression, right? Like I liked this part of the experience and not this part. And I like this other part and not this other part, right? Like we get to understand like the pieces that build up overall impression. So for us, we get to ask a question at every moment of the playthrough, and we get an answer without interfering with the experience. I'm not interrupting you playing the game saying, how did you feel? How did you feel? How did you feel? We're measuring signals that are telling us how you feel. So I think that's like spectacular. So this is what I'm most optimistic about, is being able to get kind of this moment-to-moment real-time insight into what a player is experiencing as they're playing our games. We get more objective data. So we get internal sensations that are not interpreted by the player. There's less distortion and less creativity, less rationalization in the responses. We're avoiding memory issues as well. So, we know if someone is feeling challenged. instead of just hoping they're replying to our questions honestly. If we bring playtesters into Valve and we ask them, hey, was this a hard game? They might lie because they don't, they either want to impress us, or, that they don't want to hurt our feelings, a whole bunch of reasons, right? With this, we could say, actually, no, yeah, you were feeling challenged or you weren't, and we would know, and then we could adapt accordingly. So instead of trying to, induce a particular emotion in gameplay, say fear or excitement or surprise, what if we could actually know? But yeah, somebody felt fear. We were trying to induce fear, or trying to induce excitement or novelty or surprise. We could actually know, in theory, anyway. We can do this at scale. So all the advantages of the internal playtesting, where we bring people into Valve and watch them play the games, we can get those advantages. We get them out to everybody playing our games, assuming widely available commercial hardware or consumer grade hardware. And this way, we get much more sensitive measurements of what's going on. Again, we can isolate the individual components that contribute to the overall affect or impression that players have of our game. At the moment, we kind of playtest on the population by looking at measurable changes in behavior. But if BCIs were prevalent, we could always be playtesting on everybody and asking every question we care about. And so again, that seems, for us as game designers, right? I'm describing a very, idealized scenario, but it does seem possible. And so the promise of the data we could get, the improved quality of the data we could get from BCI-based approaches is, again, I guess, enough to make us think that, it's not going to be an incremental improvement, just because we are well aware of the limitations of current generation, I guess, of current generation playtesting practices. And so, if the actual potential can be realized, the games we design should get a lot better. And that to us, yeah, we would love if that could happen, I guess. Lots of work to be done, but the potential is tantalizing. We get new kinds of data. So data we've never had before. We're no longer limited by behaviors we can explicitly measure. We can infer rationales behind the behavior, looking at positive responses and trying to avoid negative responses, and figure out measures of engagement. So we're getting more accurate measures of overall sentiments, and more granular measures of individual sentiments, and more granular measures of gameplay components. For the individual sentiment, we can look at how different classes of players respond. We design games, kind of as a one size fits all. There's obviously some variability, but here we could look at how different classes of players respond. And we can start answering game design questions and assertions with actual data. Do players like, melee or ranged combat? Do they like big explosions or small ones? Do they like going after health kits, or maybe acquiring collectibles? We become much more game designers when we can start validating these hypotheses we have, these intuitions we have about what a player finds enjoyable. We could predict when somebody's about to quit, both a session and maybe forever. We could better understand game balance. We could see if forum responses correlate to overall player-based sentiment. If you've been on the internet, you might be aware that sometimes people share strong opinions and they're not always positive. Are they more likely to share negative opinions than people who are willing to share positive opinions? Potentially. So we'd love to know if kind of the signal we're getting from forums, right, is kind of representative of the overall player base, or maybe it's an angry minority, right? In which there are kind of a bunch of real world and practical consequences as a function of that. If we listen to the forum responses that are loud and negative, are we going to negatively impact the player base at large, or vice versa? So we'd love to say, okay, yeah, what the signal we're seeing from other domains, like forums or emails or whatnot, is that correlating with how people are feeling about how they're playing the game in real time? We could better understand impressions of a new weapon, a character, a cosmetic, a map, a game mode. We could look at what parts of a game update somebody enjoyed or didn't. We could see how they feel about the game's interface. We could figure out which players are toxic, which players are good teammates. Trying to understand what are the most satisfying elements of gameplay, what are the least. What parts of the visual environment do they hate? What parts do they love? How helpful is the tutorial? I could go on, right? But again, these are all questions that we would love to answer as game designers. And again, we're just trying to understand the components that contribute to player responses. So we become better game designers because we better understand how players are experiencing our games. And we can learn a lot more about why players feel as they do, and apply this knowledge to everything we create and update in the future, right? Everything is, nothing is static, right? The hope is that we can build upon, both the good things and the mistakes that have happened in the past. And so, as we understand more about what are actually good things, actually good game designs we've made, and what are actually bad mistakes that we've made, then we build up that knowledge and we go forward with it. And so Yeah, I hope my enthusiasm for I guess some of these approaches is coming across. By nature, I think I am more pessimistic and whatnot, but it is hard not to be optimistic about what might be possible and what we could do with this data and do in this space. We also can compare responses over time. You could think about just trying to understand, the impact of a game update. So looking at, sentiment and feelings pre and post update. We can start trying to estimate the game's life cycle. At what point are people starting to lose, I guess engagement or enjoyment with the game, and does that mean that maybe it's time to move on to another product, or shift more resources and try and fix some of the issues that have arisen? You can do things like this with surveys, but it's kind of much more. The effort required is kind of potentially more intensive, and then you can't really get, again, kind of like some of the more objective data that we're hoping for. What if we knew how somebody was feeling on their first game session as compared to their 10th or their 100th? Right now we can estimate, we can look at behavior, but we'd love to get a sense for, if the same feelings of excitement you had on gameplay session number 2 were still there at gameplay session number 200. So learning how people's impressions of our game changes over time, we'd be fascinated by. We'd love to understand and know. And then again, we can combine the data we get from BCI-based approaches, any form of physiological measurement with all the current ways we work now. So essentially we get converging signals. We can validate certain hypotheses, and again, we can correlate with all the gameplay data we have. So we don't lose any of the benefits of the current approaches. We're just adding on and hopefully kind of creating, I guess, for us a much more rigorous platform for understanding, our players' experiences as they're playing our games. Okay, so let's move on to the second part of the talk. So I was excited about the playtesting. I'm more excited about this, about adaptive gameplay. We obviously would love to become better game designers, smarter game designers, but the real potential of BCI-based approaches in gaming comes down to what I'm terming adaptive gameplay. So let me get the pointer here. Okay. So this is a graph of some design work we did with one of our games called Left 4 Dead a long time ago. This is actually back in 2008, I believe. So for those unfamiliar, Left 4 Dead is like it's kind of a zombie survival game. It's like playing through a zombie movie. So you're playing with 3 other teammates. So there's 4 of you, and you're trying to make it through various levels where zombies are attacking you. And so our hope. With Left 4 Dead was, again, make you feel like you're playing through a zombie movie. And so we had a feature called the director. And so what the director's goal was to create kind of varying levels of intensity for you. So kind of create an emotional experience of highs and lows. And so you can see this middle graph. This is the director trying to say, hey, I want to go, here's a small increase in kind of intensity of the experience, drop back down. Here's a big increase, drop back down, give you some downtime, increase again, and so forth, right? So create these peaks and valleys of experience. And the way we did that was by populating the environment with varying numbers of zombies. And so you can see all the white marks are kind of like regular or common enemies to fight, and all of the kind of like the different color, the red, the yellow, blue, and so forth. All of these are kind of like mini boss or a little bit stronger zombies you had to fight. And so what we would do is create kind of a desired population of zombies to create these peaks in arousal and valleys in arousal. And you can see here that the bottom row is like kind of the actual population that the game created. And the hope is that we could, kind of simulate this experience of highs and lows and make it more enjoyable. This was an estimation. The game was taking in no signal from the player. So we actually, like as an experiment, we actually changed this. Instead of having kind of like this estimated arousal level, what we did was we hooked up galvanic skin response, so electrodermal activity sensors. For those of you unfamiliar, it's kind of just 2 metal contacts and a battery, and you can measure physiological arousal as a consequence of changes in the pH balance of your sweat. So, as you sweat, as your arousal changes, your sweat will actually carry more current. And so what we did was measuring physiological arousal through that way. We replaced kind of like this estimated arousal level with somebody's actual arousal level, and then populated the gameplay environment as a consequence. So, we did this, 12 years ago. People, we never released this. It was more like a proof of concept. And all we really had was kind of people's subjective impressions of the experience, but we had them play both versions and then compare. People liked the actual physiologically based arousal experience better. So for us, I was like, okay, like maybe there's something there. Again, we didn't release it. It never got anywhere past kind of like the prototype or experimental stage. But for us, it was okay, at least a nice first step in saying, okay, there might be something here. So what are other things we can do? If all we could measure, and people can do this in labs right now, is positive versus negative emotion, how would this change game design? Could we start placing reactions in context? So what happens when the game could actually respond to a positive or negative feeling? Not just a movement, input, or, again, switching weapons, or, choosing a level, or, accepting a reward. What happens when the game can actually respond to saying, yeah, we knew what just happened was a positive or negative experience. So think about all you could do if you knew that. How they respond if they just had a positive or negative experience inside of the game. How would you, as a game designer, change your game design? How would you have the game respond? And so we'll go through some examples on the next slides. And I don't want to just kind of like oversimplify this and say, okay, well, we only need to make things positive. No, because positive things are only positive by comparison to negative things. And so we wouldn't want to eliminate all the negative things, but we could adjust the balance. We could figure out ways to mitigate the impact of negative occurrences in gameplay and heighten the impact of positive ones. So let's go through a few examples. Think about adaptive enemies. So, if you play games, what kinds of enemies do you like playing against? What kinds of enemies are challenges? What kind are boring? If we knew the answers to these questions, again, we could have the game give you, more of the positive kind and less, and less of the boring kind. Difficulty levels become a thing of the past. So instead of having, say, beginner, novice, intermediate, advanced, expert, or whatnot, the game could adapt in real time to the difficulty level that you were seeking, right? Maybe some days you want a challenge, we'll give you a challenge. Maybe some days you want an easier experience, we'll give you an easy experience. Maybe as you're playing the game, you start off easy and you want to get harder, or maybe vice versa, right? So we are adapting in real time to what we are to what we are assessing about your experience. This is not how games work right now. You choose a level and it stays that way. But here the game is learning from what you're experiencing and how you're playing, and we're saying, okay, we're going to change the game as a consequence. We're going to change the difficulty of the gameplay as a consequence. Think about what it's like to only be able to kill an enemy while you're relaxed. Maybe you're playing a shooting game. If you're aroused, the gun is jittery. Maybe you have to stay calm. How does that change the actual gameplay experience? Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's a gimmick, maybe it's something different. As we walk through these examples, it may be that the kinds of changes I'm discussing, won't quite work with conventional game designs, right? And that's cool. That's perfectly cool. But I want us together to start thinking about new kinds of gameplay experiences that might be better suited. So I'm talking about adaptive enemies. What about adaptive teammates? If you play multiplayer games, you're playing with people sometimes. What kinds of teammates do you like playing with? What kinds of teammates do you hate playing with? What parts of the game do you enjoy doing? We could pair you with other people who like doing the kinds of things you don't like to do, and you guys could be a more cohesive team. If we identify toxic teammates, we could automatically mute them, or separate them, keep you, not let you interact with them. What if you knew how your teammates were feeling? What if they knew how you were feeling, but you just experienced a sense of surprise or pleasure or anger? How would that change how you are interacting or playing the game? I'm asking questions like this not because I necessarily have the answers, but just because BCI technology makes them seem like interesting questions to ask. We can have dynamically adaptive rewards, figure out the things you like and the things you don't, and we can start tailoring rewards to the individual player. Games are full of different ways of kind of rewarding your behavior, but we can avoid the things you don't like getting and give you more of the things that you do. The theme I want to hammer home, is that games, in some sense, are becoming less static, right? They're obviously dynamic in a variety of ways, but they're static in this way. They don't adapt to you in real time as you're playing them. So if we could do this, then games would learn more and more about you, and they would start responding individually to what you're doing and how you're experiencing it. What if you had avatars that were mimicking your in-game mood? And in-game characters would react to it. Oh, Mike, I see you're feeling frustrated. Let me, and then that changes how they respond. Or, oh yeah, hey, you're happy, right? We just had a great experience together. Obviously, we would write better scripts, but just the general notion of saying avatars, in-game characters knew how you're responding. Or what if, real players in game, their facial expressions were kind of mapped to what they were experiencing and playing? How would that change conversations and interactions? Would they more closely mimic reality? So imagine just having more realistic conversations with both, non-player characters and with real characters, with real humans in games. We're not going to solve the Turing test tomorrow, at least with the non-player characters, but we are going to change how you interact with, again, characters in game and with other players if they could see in real time, what your face was doing, how you're responding, what your emotions were. right? All of these are examples of feedback loops. And so you start with a player's intent. It's an input. The system responds, outputs, and then the player has a new intent that is conveyed to the system, and off we go. So what happens when the game starts giving you insight into what you're doing and how you're learning and how you're feeling? Could we teach you how to learn a game more effectively, right? Could we push you up the skill curve more effectively if we could create these sorts of feedback loops where the game was like, oh yeah, I don't think you quite have this yet. So let me give you another example. Or hey, you did this quicker, so let's move you along and try something new. Could we teach you how to focus more effectively or get into a flow state more effectively? Meditation programs, kind of already do this. As an example, that they kind of show you your alpha waves and give you biofeedback essentially to teach you how to relax more effectively. We can apply this to a whole variety of domains, and the system is what's actually happening. I'm hammering home a point because to us it's kind of like the crux of like this design work, or at least this research, is that having the game create feedback loops as a consequence of physiological inputs from the player. To us it opens up again a world of possibility. Here's a screenshot of one of our games, Dota. It doesn't matter if you're not familiar with it, but I just want you to think about everything that's happening on screen. And so, if we could, reliably measure aspects of internal state, internal cognition, internal emotion, we could answer questions like, what aspects of the interface, do you like or dislike? Which characters on screen or heroes on screen do you like or dislike? How do you feel about the trees, the flames that are present, the health bars, the combat? So all of a sudden, we start becoming able to assess how you're responding to various elements in game. And maybe we can start having the game change things in real time. So here's the question, right? Turn off the laser pointer. How does gameplay change when you know what the player is experiencing? What aspects of the game would change if we knew how the player was responding to them? If we knew about a player's frustration or engagement or challenge, or how immersed they were, or if they were in a flow state, we could give you cues when you're frustrated. We could give you challenge when you're bored. We could figure out when you are immersed and maybe start to understand why. And we can figure out what keeps you intrinsically motivated and better understand where we're failing in that regard. We can figure out where extrinsic motivation is unnecessary or where it's essential. We can figure out what leads to flow states and when you're in it. We can improve accessibility and figure out when players needed assistance and then respond accordingly. So here's an example of one of our not as popular titles, although I very much enjoyed it. It's a game called Alien Swarm. We released it a long time ago. Essentially, it's a top-down shooter where you're going around killing aliens. A lot of fun. And so what we did with this was kind of another experiment. This happened a long time ago. Was we gave you 4 minutes to kill 100 enemies. And so here's the timer. It's at 2:08 right now. Or I guess you can, if you can see this. Yeah, we're at 2:08 right now. And we gave you 4 minutes to kill 100 enemies. What we did though, again, was we hooked up that galvanic skin response system that I described earlier. It was a wristband at the time. And if you got more physiologically aroused, so if you got less relaxed, the timer would tick down quicker. And then as a consequence, so you'd have less time to kill the monsters. People would do that and they would get even more aroused. The timer would tick down even quicker. And then you create kind of like, you're creating this kind of like different kind of gameplay experience as a consequence of directly using physiological inputs or physiological signals as inputs to gameplay. And this is not a great example because it's a negative feedback loop, and the more aroused you get, the quicker the timer clicks down, and essentially you just kind of like you lose because you can't stay calm. But eventually, some people could, and they enjoyed that. This is not necessarily where we'd start. It's more to give an example of, hey, like, here is a piece of gameplay where we're directly using physiological signals as inputs. So you're creating a novel kind of gameplay experience. Imagine a spy game where you actually have to be a spy and fool people, using your voice or your words or your behavior, your thoughts. We could make a true role-playing game where you're acting in certain ways, again, using physiological signals as direct inputs to gameplay. Could we teach players how to play our games more effectively? So yeah, I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but when do you learn something and why are you learning it? Could we make you learn it quicker? This opens up all kinds of possibilities for different, I guess for understanding how to push people up the skill development curve in games. And then hopefully and optimistically, also outside of gameplay, right? Games are potentially a very interesting didactic tool, right, for lots of people, and kind of underutilized at the moment in the education space. If we as game designers knew how to get players into a more receptive state for learning, or how to teach them to learn quicker in various ways, that knowledge could be applied in other domains. Any aspect where skill development is useful, and hopefully in aspects of education as well. So, if we could learn how to teach players how to play our games more effectively, to us, that is a very powerful question to ask, and hopefully one that we can answer. And then conversely, can we teach games how to play our players more effectively? Game dynamics become no longer static. As we started doing this research, I started thinking more and more about how games could become more dynamic constructs. And as we start discovering what the player enjoys or dislikes, we're making fewer assumptions about the player's intent or preference. We're creating a broader range of experiences for the player, or at least we hope that we are. And so just as players respond to the game with various inputs and whatnot, the game begins to respond to the player. These are the kinds of gameplay experiences you like. Well, we can start to give you more of them, and less of the ones you don't. So gameplay becomes adaptive and personalized. We can modify the difficulty, aspects of the gameplay, the team play, your teammates, the weapons you get, and so forth. We can change the visuals, the sound, the interfaces, the characters. Everything in the game can adapt to what you're feeling and experiencing. So gameplay is no longer one size fits all. Gameplay is tailored to the player. So it's no longer a game for everybody. It's a game just for you. Again, I'm speaking in the abstract. I'm describing things that, to me at least, sound positive and appealing. There is a very long road ahead, to get to where we want to go. But right now, all of this seems possible. We haven't reached a roadblock. People have shown they can do various aspects of this, in kind of controlled environments and in the laboratory. And then the trick is getting it out into the real world. But at the moment, everything I'm describing seems viable. We do have to figure out a way to get people to get people to acquire the hardware to do this, right? VR is one natural approach, right? It's a way to convince people to put something on their head, and you get close contact to the scalp. You can get all kinds of interesting information from EEG, EMG, EDA sensors, PPG, EOG, and so forth. And so, it may not be that VR is the way. We're not wedded to that, but to us at least, it provides one possible pathway into how this reality might happen. And again, maybe we can get a bunch of this from a webcam, sitting on your top of your monitor, and go off and running, and that would be great. Nothing's off the table. But at the moment, anyway, I think we're bullish on the prospects of using VR headsets as a way of kind of starting to bring this I guess, I was going to say revolution, which is not the right word, but starting to bring about this change in how we might consume games. This shift in how games are designed and implemented. We think that at least the potential of VR in this space is I guess, quite vast. So I'm at basically the end of the talk. Again, a quick summary of why we find BCIs. It's interesting, getting the moment-to-moment insight into a player's experience, getting much more objective data and being able to do it at scale, and obviously getting all kinds of new data we didn't have access to before. And then kind of the biggest one for us is all the potential of adaptive gameplay and how game design might change as a consequence. So for me anyway, in the future, I very much hope this is how we play. And thank you very much. This is my email. Please drop me a line. There are so many interesting and hard problems to solve in this space, and our hope is to do what we can to kind of foster an ecosystem where a bunch of people are desirous of going out and helping to solve these problems, because the potential, if we can kind of realize it, is quite profound, and I'd love to see what we can do. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was amazing. Same thing as before. I noticed that I get very excited when I hear you explore all the different possibilities of how it can be applied, right? Because the more high level concepts, I think a lot of people will understand that once they study it a bit, but how it will manifest themselves in, for example, gaming, that's where you need the examples that you just gave. So thank you very much.
Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
And I got a question for you. So you touched on this already, so it's not a completely new question, but Ryan asked, so it's mostly on the concept of having real-time info based on the emotional state. And he essentially asked, like, what is the thing that you, to take your words, are most bullish on in a way?
Yeah.
So what would be your preferred method of observing a player's mental state? So would it be more along the lines of like EEG to identify some emotional state, more in a physical device, could be a heart monitor or a galvanic skin response, or just like a camera, for example, AI driven emotional assessment?
So the honest answer right now is I don't know. I mean, I'll elaborate, but like the true answer right now is we're not sure. At the moment, we're casting a wide net because we don't want to rule out anything prematurely. So, and at the moment, I mean, to be completely frank, like we're pushing, we're using essentially, laboratory or research or medical grade equipment to kind of do our testing, because we want to figure out what signals can we just get in a vacuum and then kind of pare down to what would actually work for a usable consumer product. And so we definitely spent a fair bit of time on EEG, just because there seems to be a wealth of information there that we could potentially get. I'd love it if all we needed to do was use a webcam, for example, or you build a heart rate monitor into a mouse, which is something we actually tried to do a very long time ago. You get a bunch of movement artifacts there, but like electrodrummal activity, you can actually get with a mouse pretty effectively. So we're not sure. We definitely focus a lot on EEG. We're paying attention to kind of some of the other optical imaging based approaches, and I think people are building room temperature MEGs. So maybe eventually down the line that becomes something that's interesting. But yeah, the hope is that, I mean, whatever we end up doing, for right now, we don't care about a consumer product because we just want to do the research and figure out what signals we can reliably measure. When we get to the stage, the productization stage, we're like, okay, well, what actually works for consumer in their home, then it becomes trickier. And so, yeah, I think to us, it comes down to, okay, once we know the signals we can reliably detect and how we can do that, then designing gameplay experiences that make kind of the acquisition or the purchase of the hardware worth it, right? And so if we can create an experience that kind of incentivizes the purchase of a VR headset or an EEG headset, great. If we can't do that, but we can do a bunch with a webcam, well, people have a webcam, then okay, then we'll go with that. And so there's a whole bunch of kind of work that needs and thinking that needs to go into where we end up. And so I wish I had a more satisfactory answer for you than we don't know, but I mean, it's honest, and I think it's good, because I wouldn't want us to kind of, again, rule anything out prematurely and say, oh yeah, it needs to be EEG, or it can only be a webcam, or it needs to be a heart rate monitor or an eye tracker or whatnot. It's us trying to figure out, what signals are there, and then after that, kind of deciding how to get it in the hands of consumers.
Clear, thank you. And it only makes sense, right? So it's very hard to like say what the perfect answer is. There is no perfect answer yet. That's the thing. Like, we're all in this together, essentially trying to figure out what it is. So it has to have some practical purposes. All right, another question from an anonymous attendee, and I'll try to ask it as they write it down. So, okay. Half-Life 3 on a VR-BCI device confirmed?
I'm unfamiliar with the Half-Life series. Never heard of it before. So maybe they need to share that with me. Give me some more information. Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean,
honestly, like, I'm also not a big well, I have no idea exactly what Half-Life is. I know it's a game, that's it, and I know it's a shooter, but that's about it. If you want to give more context on this question, feel free to ask it, and we'll try to ask it. Right?
I am happy to pass along the enthusiasm for a sequel to Half-Life 2 to other people at Valve. Happy to do that. That I can do.
Clear. There we go. Nice. Also, another question, which will also be hard to answer, I assume, because it's semantic.
Yep.
How far are we away from true BCI? How many years do you think until we are there? So in this case, what I'm going to do is like, I'm going to give it completely to you. Can you make up your own kind of like definition of true BCI and give some kind of rough estimate of a time frame?
Okay, so I will answer the question, but I'm going to preface it with the fact that as a psychologist, I am very happy to share with you all the ways in which humans are horrible at estimating and predicting the future. And as far as I know, no one in the history of the world has ever been able to do it successfully. Given what we know now, estimations, so we are very far away from true BCI, would be my guess. There could be a breakthrough tomorrow where, like, all of a sudden things become a lot more, all of a sudden we get this, non-invasive or maybe this greatly improved invasive approach. We're like, hey, we can do all these interesting things. But even think about like how far neuroscience has to go. But, forget like measuring what's happening. Like, we still don't know a lot about what's happening up here in terms of, how do we create different sensations, as a consequence? How do we remember a thing, learn a thing, forget a thing? Like neuroscience, we've learned a lot. We still have a very long way to go to truly understand how patterns of neurons firing in the brain give rise to the kind of like the whole spectrum of human experience. And so, true BCI, at least by definition, I guess I would yield to like, okay, I think a thing and it happens in some sense. Maybe in somewhat restricted space, you can't think of everything, but eventually, like we get to the point where like, say you could replace, driving a car, right? Just by thinking, right? I mean, obviously we won't actually need to do that with self-driving cars, but just as an example, right? Like if you could replace everything you do inside of a car with just thinking about it, and it would happen. Like, oh, I want to increase my speed to 65, miles per hour, or I want to change lanes, or I want to drive to this place, or I want to stop at a stoplight or whatnot. A device that could do that kind of unobtrusively and 100% accuracy, maybe that's a good definition of a true BCI. Maybe not, that's fine. Push back and give me better definitions, that's fine. How far away are we from that? Yeah, it's not happening tomorrow. It's not happening next year. Like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Like it is tough to know, right? I mean, lots of people are working, and lots of big companies are working in this space trying to make progress. I honestly don't know. If you want me to pick a number, I'll say, yeah, I mean, maybe 10 to 20 years we'll get something that is close to that. But I could be way off, right? Like it could be 2 years or it could be 50. Like that is the honest answer, right? Like saying, like, okay, the reason we can't answer that question is because we just don't have enough data, right? Like we don't, like the path to getting to a true BCI, right? Like we can all see it in our minds, but there are a whole bunch of steps that have not been accomplished, right? And so say there are 11 steps, right? Like how do we actually, like, I don't know how much time each of those 11 steps is going to take. And so it makes kind of like giving a time frame just a really tough thing to do. And so, but the hope again is that, as more people get interested in this space, is kind of like the work that you guys are doing, right? Like then, the time frame shortens. And so, yeah, I wish there was a better answer, but at the moment, yeah, just don't know.
No, you're giving a very solid answer. The the person who asked the question also says the same thing.
Okay.
And I know how hard it is to like actually put a number value on it, right? In terms of like an exact number of years. So no, I think that's amazing.
Yep.
Another question. Could you tell us a bit more about how Valve uses crowdsourcing?
So, okay. This may not be how they're asking the question. I'll answer it, and then you can let me know if I was, they can let me know if I was answering it in the manner in which it was posed. So, okay. So one problem with neurological data, right, is that it is incredibly noisy, right? And so, EEG experiments of, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 people, right? Like you're getting a bunch of noisy data. That's why you need to design kind of like these really strict controlled experiments where only one variable, well, I mean, this is all of science, but even more so for EEG, just because of the quality of the data, one variable is changed and you're doing a bunch of repetitive tasks over time to say, okay, yeah, when, in task A, people saw this, and task B, which is the control, they saw this, or they felt this, or we measured this, and, here's the difference, and this is why, we think there's a finding here. What changes when you can do EEG experiments with orders of magnitude more participants? So instead of 50 people, you could do it on 5,000 or maybe even 5 million someday. In a world where the data quality is low, right? I mean, like the signal to noise ratio is not high. What changes when, we can get 1 million data points from people doing the same 5-minute task, right? As opposed to, 10 people doing that same task for 50 minutes. To us, the potential of at least the improvements in our ability to accurately and reliably measure various aspects of internal state improves quite substantially, quite remarkably, or we believe it would improve quite remarkably. And then think about the potential for neuroscience in general. Like forget gameplay, just being able to do experiments on 1 million people at once, how that would change. In essence, being able to run kind of large scale experiments on the player base at large, however large that player base tends to be, it's very much, a great way of bootstrapping our progress, right? Like we need to build something compelling enough that people are willing to kind of, acquire the device and play the games, in some large number. But then once they do that, we can start learning much more effectively because the sample size is increasing so much. And so we would love to, we'd love to be able to crowdsource neuroscience in this way by getting a bunch of samples from people playing through the same gameplay experience or the same experiment. So yeah, so that's yeah. I have a longer version of this talk where I kind of go into that in a little bit more detail. But to us, that is absolutely one of the most promising kind of, I guess, avenues of exploration for us is the ability to kind of bootstrap our progress. Once we've reached that minimum bar of something that a consumer wants to play, by saying, okay, now let's run the experiments on with sample sizes that people currently doing EEG research could never dream of, and what becomes possible there. Maybe it's nothing, but again, I think that the chances are quite high that we could do a bunch of very interesting work as a consequence.
Yeah, totally. And one of the things that Steam does very well is like do these continuous kind of like on innovative initiatives and then figure out which work best, right? So that's absolutely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Just I think just maybe one more point to add to that. I think again, I mentioned this a little bit, but yeah, the goal is to foster an ecosystem, right? And so the work we're going to do, without promise, saying we're going to share everything, like I think we're going to share, almost everything, if not everything, right? Because the hope is that, the work that we're doing, people can then build off that and then build their own things, right? And then, at some point there will be a repository of, hey, here's different ways of kind of, measuring and analyzing and, various signals, and this is what they mean, and this is how you can use them in gameplay. And you hear examples of, games that do this. And so, who knows what that looks like? But the hope is that, again, yes, to use kind of whatever community we can foster on Steam and maybe in other places as well, to kind of bootstrap each other, because again, like there is so much work to be done and so many problems to solve, and we need a lot more people kind of in this space doing interesting work, to take full advantage of it, right? And so whatever we can do to kind of bolster that process, like that is our goal. So
Claire, thank you. Sounds very good. I also had a different question. Something that Adam mentioned in the talk before, very quickly, but Valve started collaborating with OpenBCI regarding the Gallia. And that's more on the BCI, the VR realm. Is there anything that you can share about that?
So I guess a little bit, I guess. I think we're still trying to work out like what we want to talk about, but really for us, like so yeah, I can speak for Valve. I think OpenBCI has I think they have we're working on the same product, and we're aligning what we want to accomplish. But I don't want to speak for them, so this is me speaking for Valve. So what we wanted was a research tool. I mentioned kind of casting a wide net, and so we wanted an integrated VR headset with a whole bunch of different physiological sensors. We wanted to see, okay, with EEG and EMG and eye tracking and so forth, and all kind of time locked to the visual and auditory stimuli that are being shown and presented. What can we do with that? So for us, it's kind of like a research tool, trying to figure out what we can reliably measure. And VR, especially, you have the contact with the scalp, but also you are basically total control of what a player is seeing and hearing. So we're kind of removing a bunch of the environmental noise that is going on. And so our hope is to kind of build a research tool and see what we can do with it, and then we'll decide on step 2. I will say that if we like what we are doing with it, we'd like to maybe build a few more of them and maybe give them out to people who are doing interesting work in this space. And so if that sounds of interest to you, please drop me a line. And maybe we can help you get your hands on one at some point. But yeah, for us, essentially it's just a modified VR headset with it's EEG, EMG, eye tracking, PPG, EOG, and an EDA sensor. And so we're just gonna use that as a research tool, and then decide where that goes after that.
I'm very excited for this.
Yeah,
this is great to hear, and thank you. That gives a lot of context, right? I think especially for the people that didn't know about all the background.
Yep.
All right. I want to be respectful of your time. It's now 5 to 6, so I think we're about good. Do you have anything that you want to share, either with the audience or some kind of like thoughts that you want to leave people with?
I think it's, again, it's great to speak to people who are interested in this space, and right, we are truly at the beginning, right? So what that means is that there are many opportunities for people to make an impact, right? So to the extent that you want to that you want to be involved at the start of something, right? You know, whatever it ends up being, right? But like the potential for BACI has the potential to be a transformative technology, right? It may fail, right? Like that's like it may, you know, or maybe, you know, maybe we don't get true BCI, but we get, you know, intermediate BCIs that do a bunch of interesting things, and that's still great. But like, you know, the potential is vast. And because we're at the beginning, you know, if you're starting to get involved now, you could make a tremendous impact, right? In ways in which maybe you couldn't make an impact in other fields, right? Like fields that are much more mature, where the quote unquote most of the great discovery has already occurred, right? Which maybe is kind of a misnomer and maybe is not actually true in any technical sense. But, you know, to the extent that, you know, you feel like you'd like to make an impact, you know, in a domain, in a field, right? Like, because there's so much to do here, and because we're at the beginning, and because we have so much to learn, right? Like, well, here's your shot. You know, so, you know, take it. So jump in there, right? Like, you know, reach out to anybody who's doing interesting work and see how you can help. You know, go to school, work on your own, do whatever, participate in NeuroTechX stuff, do whatever you can, because we have so much to do. But once again, you know, if you're smart and invested in the space, then you could truly actually, you know, come up with something that ends up changing the world, which is, you know, a nice ideal to possess, a nice ideal to have, and a nice ideal when it can actually be realized, right? When it's not just an ideal, like the potential is actually there for this to happen. And so, yeah, please do. Please take your shot.
Totally agreed. And also, if I can add to this, like the industry is so young that you can get in touch with people that in 5 or 10 years from now, you're going to think like, wow, that really, that like just had a normal call essentially, right? That's the kind of stuff, because everyone is in the early phases, and it's not about a prestige thing, but it's about the access that you have to the people that are truly working on the beginning of this kind of technology. So yeah, totally. Yeah. All right. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Mike, for this great talk. Thank you everyone for your attention and your time, essentially. And we hope to see you in, let's say, 1 or 2 months for a new event.
Yeah. So, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right. There we go. I'll stop the recording.